Hi guys, we got a lovely Volkswagen behind us, 05 VW Golf 2-liter. Really initially with this video, I just kind of wanted to do a quick tip of techniques, or a technique that I use for doing a leak down test. If you look up how to do a leak down test, it tells you how to, bring it to #1 top dead center, make sure that each, if you go to a different cylinder, make sure each cylinder is at top dead center. Well, sometimes that's hard to figure out on a vehicle. You don't need to do that. All you need to do is make sure the valves are closed, right? So I just wanted to use this as an example to kind of show that with this vehicle, because it's nice and open, relatively easy to make a video on. However, there's a bunch of stuff that happened with this car that I think is worth talking about. So I'll kind of make two videos. This will be the one that kind of explains the backstory of this car, because I think there's some useful information here, particularly with these Volkswagens if you're doing any of these. And then the later part where I'm talking about this, I'll just kind of separate that and make that as a separate video. So if you just kind of want to see a neat way of doing a full leak down test on a vehicle on all the cylinders without having to worry about finding top dead center, or you can do it really, really fast, I'll just put the link to the other video. Otherwise, if you want to see the whole thing, plenty of good information on here. So without further ado, we'll go to the vehicle, kind of what the initial backstory. It's towed in, no start, go out there, sure enough, it's cranking away, not firing. Occasionally there's a single little burble, but no fire really of any significant kind. So quick little thing to do, it's easy enough to pull the fuel line off the rail. It's dumping fuel. Yes, I know that's not the full test, but hey, it's something, right? Quick and dirty. So then grab the scan tool, and there's a bunch of codes. There are 2 mass airflow sensor codes, but there's also some cam sensor codes, right? Now, a mass airflow sensor can definitely cause certain vehicles to not start, but a lot of vehicles, when they're running crappy, will trigger a mass airflow sensor code, because what they're looking at is they're looking at the RPMs, they're looking at the throttle angle, and they're saying, hey, we should have a whole bunch more air coming through. So it triggers the code. But that's kind of a symptom. Real problem is it's just running horribly. The cam sensor codes are definitely the codes you want to look at first. So if you're familiar with these, one second here. If you're familiar with these cam sensors, I'll show you where it lives in the car. You see this connector sticking out, and so that means it's got a sub harness. Anytime you see a sub harness and a cam sensor, usually that means it's not a pleasant one, especially when it goes into the timing cover. So first things first, I go to the lookup and see what the labor is to change the cam sensor, and sure enough it says 3 hours. So that means you're taking the cam sprocket off. You're taking the timing belt off. And absolutely that's the case. I'll show you a close-up image because it's not showing up on the camera that well. This style here, it's got its own permanent magnet. It's got a little window that the cam reluctor wheel goes through, and then it's got the sensing element. Absolutely, this is behind the cam sprocket. Now, on these vehicles, let's shove that off to the side. The timing cover, the top timing cover, it's got the 2 little tabs. They come off easily. The whole cover doesn't come off that easily in the vehicle because you got the fuel lines, you got the evap lines, you got coolant lines, you got power steering lines, you got a bunch of junk in the way. But you can peel it back enough to take a peek at the belt. Sure enough, the belt looks really oily, looks nasty. So you know what? It's getting a timing belt kit. Now, we could look at that sensor, we could diagnose that sensor, we could hook up an oscilloscope to it, check the pattern, what's cranking, we can check the powers, we can check the grounds. However, we are doing a timing belt. Do you really want to risk that sensor being intermittent, and at the time when you look at it, it's showing okay? Do you really want to risk that being 100% okay, and then down the way, you know what, the next day maybe it triggers a code and you got to rip the whole thing apart again? We don't, our customer doesn't. So rather than spending time diagnosing this thing, it's flagging a code continuously. it's getting a sensor. It's just not worth doing it all over again. But anyways, we know we're going after that. So what I do when I do timing belts, put it up to number 1 TDC. Usually the cam sprocket is really easy to see the timing mark, so I'll start with that. I'll just look at that, line that up. So all I ever do is I just pay attention to the sprocket. Once that mark lines up, we know we're at number 1 TDC compression. So I then make some marks from the sprocket to the belt, make a whole bunch of marks, including an arrow for the direction of rotation, because then I know which way to, you know, flip that over to the new timing belt, and then which way to put that on there, right? If you don't pay attention to which way is which, then your marks won't line up to, yeah. Anyways, so I'm making my marks, and then I go down to the crankshaft sprocket and go to make some marks for that. However, I don't see any marks on the crankshaft sprocket because I want to make sure that the crank is at TDC as well. I don't want to rely on that cam because we didn't hear this thing run. It's a no start, remember? And we did have a cam crank correlation code. So we want to make sure that time is correct. We don't just want to transfer that over. That would make for a bad day. So on the harmonic, the 4 main holes, they're not equidistant. They are offset. This will actually only go on one way. You don't have to worry about marking it. There is a mark on, again, I'll put a picture up there. There's a mark on the outside, the top inside of the harmonic. There's a little dash. I put a little paint mark if you can see that. However, it's not lining up to anything. You know, I checked the all data service information, and for crank timing, it's talking about you remove something to look at the flex plate. I couldn't really see that on this vehicle. So what I do, phone a friend. We have a European parts store, a specialty store here, and the guy that works there, one of the guys that works there, his whole family has been Volkswagens and Europeans for like 3 generations. He was born into it. The guy freaking knows everything. So, especially about Volkswagens. So I go to ask him about this, and spooky, absolutely spooky. He immediately, without skipping a beat, just snap, starts telling me which one of these bolt holes is facing straight up, and then the smaller hole, the hole that has the divot, that's over at the 4 o'clock position, just like right there over the phone, right? And I'm like, how the heck do you know this stuff? Because he's uncanny like that. Yeah, sure enough, he'd just done one of these that weekend, but still, the guy is amazing. So with what he's saying, now our small hole that holds the divot is sticking over at the 7 o'clock position, which makes sense because this mark right here is not pointing at anything that makes any kind of sense. So with how oily the belt is and all that stuff, yeah, I'm pretty sure she's jumped. Tells me everything I need to know. I'm pulling this intake plug, I'm making sure, because I don't trust those marks. So he was also saying that this mark, if you have one that's properly timed, this mark is supposed to line up to one of the covers behind it. I would have to assume that was the case. I couldn't see anything. These are the 2 covers. The very bottom and then the intermediate cover, they go like so. So this guy up here, the intermediate one, there's a spot kind of roughly where you think that should line up, and it's rusted right out. So if the mark was on there, I don't see it anymore. The bottom one, this is the one that would make more sense. It was super dirty, I couldn't see it. Sure enough, I rub it off, and yes, there is a little divot there, and that's what would make sense with this lineup mark. It makes sense that that sticks straight up. It doesn't make sense for that to be way off to the side where you can't see it. And sure enough, what he's talking about with this hole that has the divot mark, if it's actually at 4 o'clock and this other hole is pointing straight up, then our mark would line up just like that. So now I go through and I look at the vehicle, and at this point I'll kind of take you to the vehicle, kind of show you what I did, and show you that, yeah, she jumped. So let me get you set up and I'll take you over to the vehicle. Okay, so we're kind of set up with the vehicle, and I'll show you how far it's out. It's actually out 5 teeth, I believe. If you look right here at the sprocket, it's all painted, and of course I've rotated the engine lot, so all my marks that I made on the belt are way out. I'm gonna have to scratch those out, make new marks. I'll just put them in a different color. So we can see that for this to be at number 1 TDC, that should be pointing right at this paint mark right there where it says OT. And I got the number 1 spark plug out. I got a big long extension in there, so we'll see where the piston reaches top dead center, and then we'll be able to see where that lineup is. And right there, that is the pistons at the top, and we can see we are actually, is that pistons all the way at the top? No, not quite. There we go. That's just crowning, and it's just starting to come down. We can see this mark right here. So we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teeth out, and it's starting to come down. So that's not good. Okay, so here is our crank sprocket. Now, hopefully you can see that. Get you a little closer. There is a casting mark right here on the oil pump, and we will have one bolt hole that lines directly up with that. The tooth of that sprocket above that bolt hole, when the number 1 TDC at the crankshaft is lined up, this tooth mark directly above a bolt hole is lined up with that casting mark. Now, this is what I was talking about. Here's the one that's got the little divot, and here's the one that's even. The one that's at the divot is, you know, roughly 4 o'clock, is right in line with this hole right, or this open casting mark right here. Now, if we grab our harmonic, that is up here. Let's throw this on there quickly. You would be, come in. Okay, there we are. So again, you don't really have to worry about marking it because it can only go one way. So if we try rotating it to another spot, right, you see how it's covering up the other holes? And with this spot right here, you can kind of see where the dirty marks are of, you know, so there's a dirty mark of a divot. So yes, you will, again, it's covering. So we bring this back, this will only go on one way. So you don't have to worry about marking it to the sprocket. Okay, we'll line that back up. Okay, so from looking from up top, again, this is gonna be a little harder to see, but that mark, that little notch in the harmonic, is also in line with, oh, my light's moving, is also in line with that casting mark on the oil pump. If you wanted something a little easier to spot, you could, you know, just to make sure you are lined up, you could grab this guy right here, throw a couple bolt holes in there just to kind of line that up, just to see for sure, okay, yes, we are matched up with that, and then you know you're good. You line that sucker up, and then you line up your cam, and you're good to go. You can do the rest of the timing job. The instructions in all data definitely didn't really talk about that very well. So if you are doing one of these, those are the various ways you can make sure your crankshaft sprocket are lined up on these Volkswagens. Kind of want to talk about, since this has jumped 5 teeth, it's not starting, got the cam crank correlation, all that stuff. I want to make sure that nothing is bent. Now we could go through, do the timing belt, kind of leave it as is, and then run it and see if it runs, but we'd like to know beforehand. This is just a 4-cylinder. It's not that hard to pull this plenum off, so we'll go through and we'll check it out. We'll make sure that none of them are bent, or at least we'll make sure that the cylinders are sealing. Then we can carry on with the job. We don't have to worry about, are we pulling the head? Hopefully you guys can see that. I know it's upside down. You can also see the crankshaft sprocket. We are at high sealing. So I'll start rotating it. Okay, I think we're blast. All right, now we can hear all that coming out of the intake. We're into the intake stroke. Pretty loud. All right, it's all blasting out of there, number 1 intake. So we'll get out of the intake valve, or out of the intake stroke. Okay, we're starting to get a little harder to turn. That noise is starting to go away. It's starting to get pretty hard to turn. Okay, you can see that our cylinder leakage is dropping. It's kind of pushing the piston down. And okay, so we're getting the cylinder leakage is starting to drop. If this were good, this would get harder and harder to turn. Now, with a leakage tester, you have to put a certain amount of air in there. If you don't put enough air in there, it'll all leak past the piston rings, because the piston rings don't make a perfect seal, especially on a cold engine. So if you only put a tiny bit of air in there, yeah, you're gonna see full leakage. But the only place that should be leaking out of, if you don't put enough air in there, so like right now, if I put more air in there, see how the percentage of leakage drops. But the only spot that air should be escaping out of is out of the crankcase, if you're not putting enough air through to seal the piston rings. You should never be having air coming out of the intake. You can hear that, right? That sucks. Yeah, our intake valve is damaged. That's not good. Because we're in a spot, so it just rotated back. It's pushing the piston down back into the intake stroke. So if I lessen the air pressure, just shut that right off, I will put our camshaft, I know you probably won't be able to see that very well right now. I'll put our camshaft to TDC. Now keep in mind, our crankshaft is not aligned. So right now our crankshaft is actually going down. It's a little bit down, but right now our camshaft is at TDC. So both of the valves should be closed right there. So for sure, we should not have any air coming out of there. Oh, I'll have to get this back again because it will, it'll try and rotate the engine. I gotta try and hold it, prevent it from rotating. If I can do that with one hand. Crap, oh, I thought this was good. That's what happens when you try and go too quickly. Well, that sucks. But making YouTube videos saves the day. Boy, would I have felt like a fool if I put this together. And it didn't start because, yeah, we got a damaged valve. So, our camshaft is at TDC. We don't care that our piston's not. Our camshaft's at TDC. Both those valves should be closed. And it's not. So, let me shut this off. My borescope's a pile of crap right now, but let me shove that down the hole and I will see if I can't get a shot of what's going on. Let's see if I can see the valve. But anyways, does this make sense? So when you're looking at Wow, that sucks. We got a lot of stuff to do. We don't really have time to pull ahead. Oh well, it's not that bad to do on these. Wow. Customer kind of wanted this vehicle to go on a trip tomorrow. That ain't happening. Sorry. Does that make sense? You know what? Rotate the engine over, and you should get, get to the point of where it's, where it's starting to get harder and harder to turn, and the needle comes off of high and starts going into the low. Once that happens, you know you're at a spot where both of the valves should be closed. You'll see right here, it did move. So at least, yes, okay, we do have leakage past that intake valve. We know that for sure, but at least it was hard to move. It was building pressure. So that means the valve was supposed to be closed. So even if we didn't have the ability to see this, we would know that, okay, since all of a sudden, it was easy through the exhaust stroke, easy through the intake stroke. Now all of a sudden it's getting hard to turn. Okay, we keep turning. Okay, there's stop where that is. Hold the crankshaft where it's placed. Turn down the air so you can get it ready, because it's gonna move the piston. And then what you can do is you can get someone to hold the engine, prevent it from rotating while you go through listening for where the air is coming through. Or at least, if you don't hear that, like we have that open, so obviously we could hear that loud and clear. But what you go through is, you check your coolant bottle, make sure it's not going through the head gasket, pull the dipstick tube. You might hear a little bit of noise out of there. It's always normal to hear a little bit past the piston rings, but you know what, if you go to crack that dipstick tube up a little bit to get it off of the O-ring, it shouldn't go shooting up. The intake, right? Normally you could just listen for the air cleaner. Can you hear out of there? Then the only other place you can hear it is out of the exhaust. So if you hear it at any of those spots, oh, sorry, let me back up. There is another place you can hear it, and it can be tricky to hear sometimes. But the other place that it can leak is you can get a crack between cylinders, and what it can do is it can leak into the next combustion cylinder. So the other thing you want to check too, here's how you know, you don't have to be at TDC. So you check the intake, so you pull the air box off, listen there. You check your coolant bottle, listen there. You pull your dipstick, listen there. You check your exhaust, listen there. The other thing too, if you want to be sure you don't have a cracked cylinder leaking into an adjacent cylinder, pull those spark plugs. But let me yank this crap out. I'll throw my borescope down there. I'll see if I can't see anything, and then I can go home. Hopefully. Okay, so hopefully this will show. This is actually really hard to do on these cameras. Get it to point exactly where you want. Crap. Where is it again? Come on. Yeah. Can you see that? The end of that valve there? That's a contact mark. That's a big contact mark. That's bent. Sure would love to be able to get that right down in there, but I can't quite position that. Yeah, that hit. You can almost see that's lifted on that corner, or at least sure. Oh, come on. Sure looks that way. Yeah, I just can't quite get that exactly where I want it to be, but yeah. You see that whole edge there? Yeah, that made contact. Uh-oh. Whereas this one right here, this is the exhaust valve. See, we don't see anything all the way around. Looks nice and good. But our intake valve, yeah, that's gross. Uh-oh.